Good morning, everybody. A little guitar music to wake you up if you haven't woken up yet. Great to be here with you. My name is Peter Bolland. This is Friday Reflections, and you're in San Diego Oasis space. And I know you know that because you registered for this, but I just always like to say that so we know where we are and what we're doing exactly. Welcome to the second Friday Reflections of this year. We kicked off the series again last Friday. Thanks for so many of you being there for that session. Thanks to so many of you who joined me just a couple of days ago on Tuesday morning for my webinar called Dismantling Racism, One Insight at a Time. Really great to see so many folks there. Just want to make a quick announcement about another upcoming webinar, kind of in the same vein. It's almost kind of a parallel piece, not literally a series of talks, but very, very related material. So if you had a good time learning and exploring and thinking through some of those challenging issues we thought about last Tuesday at the Dismantling Racism One Insight at a Time webinar, consider joining us for our upcoming webinar on Tuesday, February 23rd, called Why It's So Hard to Talk About Racism. Because it is. And why is it so hard? We know we need to. And what are some of the things that kind of get our tongues tied in knots or make us nervous or make us avoid the whole thing? And we know now that avoiding it just perpetuates it. So it's time to put on our big boy and big girl pants and do the deal. Grow up and take care of business. It is our work to do. It's not for somebody else to do. It's my work. It's your work. So some of you are interested and drawn into this, and I honor that. And for those of you that are even just curious and maybe on the fence about this, you're like, I'm not a racist. I don't need this. Come by and check it out. I think you'll find it illuminating and challenging. So see a lot of you on Tuesday, February 23rd for Why It's So Hard to Talk About Racism. All right. So let's get to the business at hand. We are here every Friday in this little 30-minute session called Friday Reflections to, as the name suggests, reflect. And I don't know in advance what the topics are going to be. I usually pull something together just in the hour before we meet because it always, I want it to be rooted in where we are right now. And so last week I talked a lot about January 6th and the insurrection and all of that stuff. Today we're going to go a completely different direction. This isn't a political or current events program, but on the other hand, as we do dig back into the world's wisdom traditions, philosophy, spirituality, mythology, and poetry, and art and beauty and everything else, as we reach into all of those boxes, looking for tools that we can apply to the challenges that you and I are living through right now. And so naturally, our struggle is going to come up. And a lot of us are struggling about what's happening in Washington, D.C. this whole last week. We are in the midst of a Senate trial, the second Senate trial of an American president in history, the second one for the same guy twice. That's new. We're in uncharted waters here, and it's I can't really watch the trial. It's just too much for me. I'm a little overwhelmed, and I look at reports in the evening and get some highlights, but it's difficult for me to look at all the video, for example, that they've unearthed and pieced together in a very clear timeline. It's literally gut wrenching. And 6 minutes in, I'm practically throwing up and crying. And I can't witness that much irrational rage and violence. I can't watch endless footage of brave police officers being beaten, getting fingers removed, having their eyes gouged out, being killed and crushed, and getting their vertebrae crushed. There are so many police officers injured, and two who took their own lives. And so we are in the middle of a maelstrom that is unprecedented in my lifetime, and how can that not be in our minds? So I have turned away a little bit from current events and from the news. I mean, I stay in touch, but I can't live there, right? And so I've been diving into this book a lot lately. I waved this book around last Friday too, The New Seeds of Contemplation, Thomas Merton. And I want to think about Thomas Merton with you a little bit today. I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. But what's on my mind is looking at the calendar is next Tuesday is Mardi Gras, French. It sounds better in French, doesn't it? Fat Tuesday. Mardi Gras, or in Latin American countries, of course, Carnival, which means the festival of carne, flesh, incarnation, the flesh festival. In other words, pleasure, imbibing, beauty, dance, music, everything that the body just like wants. That's what happens on Mardi Gras, because the next day is Ash Wednesday, the beginning of, in traditional Christian circles, a 6-week period of repentance, of withdrawal, of reflection, of withholding from yourself certain pleasures or trying to change some of your habits. And that's called Lent, right? So on Ash Wednesday, traditionally in Roman Catholic and in many other Christian communities, you go to the priest and they take some ash, and the priest puts it on your forehead and says, there's a couple of different options, but basically that letting you get set up for the fact that we all come from ashes and to ashes we return, the impermanence. And me being a big student of Asian philosophy, Buddhism and Hinduism and all the rest, impermanence and renunciation are a big theme and something that's been fascinating to me for many, many years. Now, I have decided to participate in Ash Wednesday and Lent this year. I'm a professor of religious studies. I've taught this stuff for 30 years. I've been in every kind of religious ceremony and house of worship, and I've been on a lifelong quest and journey myself. I just love all that stuff. So I'm going to do Lent. I've never done it before. I've just been outside looking in, and I'm going to do Ash Wednesday. I'm going to, all the churches are closed, right? So I'm going to drive over to St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral Saturday morning, Saturday morning, and where they're handing out little baggies of consecrated ashes. And those ashes are made from the burned palm fronds from last year's Palm Sunday, which happens during Holy Week right before Easter, So they save all those palm fronds, they get burned and then mixed with a little holy water or consecrated oil and maybe a little drop of incense for scent. And I'm going to pick up a little baggie and then drive home. And then on Ash Wednesday, Lori and I will participate in their YouTube virtual Ash Wednesday service, and we will self-administer, put the cross on our forehead. And I'm kind of excited about it. I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating step, and it's a little odd because I'm technically not a Christian, right? I've never been confirmed. I've never been baptized. I didn't grow up in the Christian tradition. So I'm kind of barging in here, crashing the party, and I'm sure I'm welcome. And I know I am. And, but I've been on a bit of a journey these last 4 years, and this last year, particularly of pandemic. And I've been kind of diving back into the Christian mystics and really, really taking them in and looking at them all again. I speaking of Thomas Merton, I am at almost all the way. No, in fact, I did finish it just last week. His remarkable memoir of conversion, The 7-Story Mountain. And maybe I'll do a Friday reflections on that someday. But he's one of my favorite writers. I mean, he could write descriptions of grass growing and I would find it the most enthralling prose on earth. So he can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned as a writer. But what he's writing about is really fascinating to me, even though it's kind of like not my world. And he's writing about the monastic tradition. He is a Trappist monk, a Cistercian monk. And the 7-Story Mountain is the whole journey, is the whole story of his life and how he ended up being a monk. But anyway, this book here that I'm waving around, the New Seeds of Contemplation, is probably his second most famous book after The Seven-Story Mountain. And they're just beautiful reflections on what contemplation means, what the contemplative life means. And I'm really struck by it because it sounds a lot like what the Buddhists mean by awakening, what they mean by nirvanic consciousness. So I've just decided to jump into this Lent thing, even though I didn't come to it through the traditional take, and again, my perception of the traditional take, not being a Christian. So to me, from the outside, it always looked like, through basically the Catholic lens, it always looked like a lot of, apologizing and being sorry for the sin you've done, and almost a kind of life denying asceticism, like we must withdraw from the sensory world, nothing fun, nothing that feels good. Every natural impulse is a sin and you must apologize for it and feel shame. And that was my kind of perception of the whole thing. And I got that perception from a lot of ex-Catholics who basically talked like that. It's like, I had to walk away, too much guilt, too much shame. But as I kind of working my way up to a passage here from Merton that really flipped over my whole thinking. And isn't it true that you've experienced this so many times? You have a perception of something from far away. When you're outside, you kind of you make up some, you have some opinions about that. And then when you get closer and you experience it, all of your opinions practically turn into their opposite. You're like, I didn't know anything when I was over there. And that's happening to me around this Lent repentance idea. All the Christian language is transforming for me. And it's shifting into something else. And it's because of Merton and a lot of other great voices that I really respect in are kind of around the edges of Christianity. I think Merton's pretty mainstream. He's everybody's favorite Catholic. But these guys are usually outsiders when they're born, right? Saint John of the Cross, another favorite Christian mystic of mine, he spent a lot of time in jail because the church leaders put him there. It so often happens that the revolutionaries of one age are seen as enemies of the church. And then a couple centuries later, they're saints. And everybody loves them and respects them. It happened to Martin Luther King, if I could shift gears quickly into that. Those of us of a certain age remember exactly that, in the early 60s, before his assassination, he was not a popular figure. He was reviled. He was seen as an enemy of the state. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI were all over him. He was against the war. He was unpatriotic. He was pointing out the connections between poverty and racism and illiteracy and social justice and the low minimum wage. And I mean, he was just a thorn in the side of comfortable capitalist America. But now that he's safely dead, he can be sanctified and lifted up to the hallowed figure that now everybody loves. And so it's an interesting dynamic to see that happen with these rebels, with these revolutionaries who are initially a thorn and then they bloom into a rose later. So I came into this idea of Lent, of repentance, of going into a period of conscious spiritual mindfulness, letting go of some habit that I'm kind of tired of anyway, that isn't really serving my highest good. I'll tell you what that is in a little bit. But, when Lori and I administer the ash cross on each other's foreheads and we say, remember that you are dust and to dust you shall return. And that's Ash Wednesday. And then begins the 6 weeks of this process. Like I said, I came into that through the Buddhist concept of non-attachment. That Buddha, and I was really caught by that we are to be, to use the gospel phrase, in the world, but not of the world. To love everything fully, but to be willing to let go. To understand, as Krishna says in the Gita, that I don't control or own any of this. And the harder I cling to it, the more painful it is when it is eventually lost to me. Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics make the same kind of argument. That's really what Lent is about too. This consciousness of letting go, this consciousness of renunciation, this practice of I don't need that thing that I thought I needed. And in Hinduism, again, it's called renunciation. And there's even the renunciant, the one who has renounced. And that is called in Sanskrit a sannyasin. And it's a whole sociological category of people in India who have let go of their name, changed their name, let go of their reputation, their career, kind of walked away from the external supports and thrown themselves, to put it in theistic terms, on the mercy of God, knowing that there is grace always bubbling up everywhere right under our feet, and that you don't need to hold on to anything because more is always coming. So I'm intrigued by what I'm going to be experiencing. I thought, well, since I have this weekly program with y'all, I'll share that with you now, because maybe some of you are interested in trying this too. And there are many people here with us today for whom Lent is a beloved ritual that they participate in every year. And for others of you here on this call, it's an outsider tradition to you and something you haven't done and don't know much about. So there's all kinds of folks with us here this morning. And I want to share with you the passages from the second chapter of The New Seeds of Contemplation by Thomas Merton. And it's 2 pages, so it's a little bit of a long read. Bear with me. But I think it's going to help you see through the lens that I'm looking at through, at what Lent might mean. Merton's going to do something tricky here. Now, remember, he's a Roman Catholic. I mean, all the way, right? Big time Catholic, and a monk, no less. But listen to how he frames, not necessarily Lent. He's talking about the world, the material world, the world of pleasure. Because for Lent, a lot of people, like I said at the top, kind of cartoonishly think of it as giving up fun stuff and just suffering for 6 weeks. And then Easter, you get to go back to having chocolate or whatever it is you gave up, right? Yeah, I have a friend of mine who's Roman Catholic. She, last year for Lent, she gave up saying the F word, because she was kind of tired about how easy the F word was rolling off her tongue. And I don't know if I could do that for Lent, because I like that word. I use it a lot. And sometimes even with the mother in front of it, especially these last 4 years. So maybe I'll work my way up to that one. But for this year, I'm going to give up Facebook. And some of you are my Facebook friends, and you know that for 16 years I've been on Facebook, and I've really loved it. And I'll talk about that on some other day more fully, but I'm letting it go for 6 weeks. I already gave it up for December and January, and I kind of liked it. And now I'm back on again, just posting some things. I'm going to let it go for Lent. So starting next Wednesday, I'm going to deactivate all my Facebook pages, and I won't be back until Easter. But here's what Thomas Merton writes. This is, sorry, not chapter 2, chapter 4. It's called Everything That Is Holy. Everything that is holy. Sorry, I left the comma in the wrong place. Everything that is holy. That's like right out of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Okay, here's Thomas Merton. Detachment from things does not mean setting up a contradiction between things and God, as if God were another thing and as if his creatures were his rivals. We do not detach ourselves from things in order to attach ourselves to God, but rather we become detached from ourselves in order to see and use all things in and for God. See, he just pulled the pin through the hand grenade and blew up the kind of low-level spiritual consciousness of many Christians, which is, I cannot love God and the world. I have to pick one. It's either or. And he says, nope, that's not it at all. Don't turn God just into another thing who is competing with the things that he made, namely the world. He goes on, this is an entirely new perspective, which many sincerely moral and ascetic minds fail utterly to see. There is no evil in anything created by God, nor can anything of his become an obstacle to our union with him. This hit me like a ton of bricks as I prepare to go into Lent here. To continue, the obstacle is in our quote unquote self. That is to say, in the tenacious need to maintain our separate, external, egoistic will. It is when we refer all things to this outward and false self that we alienate ourselves from reality and from God. It is then the false self that is our God. And we love everything for the sake of this self. We use all things, so to speak, for the worship of this idol, which is our imaginary self. In so doing, we pervert and corrupt things. Or rather, we turn our relationship to them into a corrupt and sinful relationship. We do not thereby make them evil, but we use them to increase our attachment to our illusory self. Are you with me? He's doing an interesting thing here. He's challenging his Catholic readers and all of us to say, when you become an ascetic, when you turn away from the world, thinking that that's how you get closer to God, you're really just in love with your own ego. I'm in control. I'm going to dominate my appetites. That will connect me to God. And he's like, hold on here. And it's no wonder when you read these early passages of Merton that you realize that no wonder later in his life, 10 years after this, he fell in love and really already now with Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. You know, he died in Thailand when he was in his early 40s, I think, of electrocution and an accident in his hotel room. A clock or some electric appliance fell into the bathtub he was in. But he was in Thailand putting together conferences between Buddhist monks and Catholic monks. And I can really feel it here. So just a little bit more. He goes on, he says, those who try to escape from this situation by treating the good things of God as if they were evils are only confirming themselves in a terrible illusion. Again, egotism. They are like Adam blaming Eve and Eve blaming the serpent in Eden. Woman has tempted me. Wine has tempted me. Food has tempted me. Woman is pernicious. Wine is poison. Food is death. I must hate and revile them. By hating them, I will please God, end quote. These are the thoughts and attitudes of a baby, of a savage, and of an idolater who seeks by magic incantations and spells to protect his egotistic self and placate the insatiable little God in his own heart. I love Merton. He just punches you in the face with this stuff. He's not coddling anybody. It goes on, it turns a man into a fanatic, no longer capable of sustained contact with the truth, no longer capable of genuine love. In trying to believe in their ego as something holy, these fanatics look upon everything else as unholy. Those paragraphs, those lines just leaped off the page at me the other day as I was thinking about this process of letting go of whatever it is that this is a very personal, private thing. Maybe don't even tell anybody. Like if you were going to do this Lent thing, like I'm going to do starting next Wednesday, what is it you would give up? Maybe you watch too much TV. Maybe you gossip too much. Maybe it's the obvious ones, you know, not eating right. Maybe you want to exercise. It's not just giving up things, it's taking on new habits too. I'll leave that entirely up to you. And you can look online and see what other people suggest. Lots of good articles about this. But I think the best answer comes from within. You know what you're sick of. You know what your soul is sick of that isn't helping you. One last sentence from Merton. He says, the only true joy on earth is to escape from the prison of our own false self and enter by love into union with the life who dwells and sings within the essence of every creature and in the core of our own souls. And the words life and who are capitalized in that sentence. The only true joy on earth is to escape from the prison of our own false self and enter by love into union with the life who dwells and sings within the essence of every creature and in the core of our own souls. Lent is not a turning away from the world. It is a running and embracing with the beauty of the world. This whole passage, this whole chapter is about the saints, because Catholics look up to the saints, right? And how the saints are not running away from the world. They're in love with the world, even their own bodies. This is not a philosophy of self-contempt, of self-loathing, of demonizing the material world, the world of beauty. We just need to change our relationship with it. You know, when I quit drinking 19 years ago, for a while there, I couldn't go into a bar, you know, I couldn't be around it. And then I just realized this has got nothing to do with me, what other people are doing. It's not the substance that was the problem. I don't have to run away from it. I just need to change my behavior and change. And any of you who've been through the recovery process, I just had to change my whole relationship with myself. And this business, Kierkegaard, Merton talks about the true self. Kierkegaard talks about that too, and so does Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So at a deeper level, is Christianity life denying? You know, again, that's how it looks from afar. Oh, these are a bunch of people that just want you to feel guilty because you have a sexual urge. No. And that was a surprise to me. So I'm on a bit of a journey with Christianity. You know, I don't know what'll happen at the end of this Lent process. Am I going to get baptized? I don't know. I'm never going to walk away from anything else. But there's a real sense in which I haven't given Christianity its due because I've been so busy looking at everything else and kind of running away from Christianity. So it is a curious thing that's drawing me into this. And I want to leave you finally with a poem from one of my favorite poets, and that is Hafiz, as he's known in the West. He's a Persian poet, Iranian poet. He's the Shakespeare of Iran. He's their most beloved literary figure. Hafiz lived in the 14th century, you know, in the 1300s. And he comes to us in the English-speaking world these days largely through the great English translation by Daniel Ladinsky, Ladinsky, Ladinsky. Daniel Ladinsky's translation of Hafiz. It's a book called The Gift. A lot of you have it already. Even if you don't like poetry, you should get this book because it's kind of your entry, you know, into poetry, just like Rumi is. It's natural language, easy to read, plain talk. It's not like the poetry in the New Yorker magazine, which, unless it's a Billy Collins poem, which they do publish once in a while, but most of the stuff in the New Yorker, I can't understand a word of it. I read it and I come away going, well, poetry's not for me. So this is called, as my great poetry teacher, may he rest in peace, Steve Cowett, taught me, was that this is poetry that is natural language poetry. It's just how people talk, right? All right. So this is called Now is the Time. And I want to leave you with this from the Sufi mystic Hafiz, the Sufi Muslim. So this is from an entirely different tradition, right? The Islamic tradition, but he's a Sufi. So he's a mystic, just like Merton and St. John of the Cross are mystics, and Julian of Norwich and St. Teresa of Avila and Meister Eckhart and all the rest of these mystics that many of you and I have studied before. So here's Now is the Time by Hafiz. Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Now, why not consider a lasting truce with yourself and God? Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were just a child's training wheels to be laid aside when you can finally live with veracity and love. Hafiz is a divine envoy whom the beloved has written a holy message upon. My dear, please tell me, Why do you still throw sticks at your heart and at God? What is it in that sweet voice inside that incites you to fear? Now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. This is the time for you to deeply compute the impossibility that there is anything but grace. Now is the season to know that everything you do is sacred. That all-inclusive divinity where everything becomes, in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, bereft of triteness. Everything begins to shimmer with significance, with holiness. Everything. Don't leave anything out. So Lent, in my understanding, in my growing understanding, is not an ascetic hardship. It's not a walking away from the beauty and pleasure of life. It is a diminution, like grabbing the dimmer switch on my self-absorption, on my need to egoically control, letting go of that so I can finally show up in the world Buddha-like, Christ-like, childlike, and enjoy what the world is, theistic language or atheistic language aside. So that's what I'll be starting off on this next Wednesday. Just wanted y'all to know about that. You are on your own path, as we all are, but that's where I've been, and that's what I've been reflecting on this week. So thanks for joining me for another edition of Friday Reflections. See you next Friday.